Welcome to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno.
Faith. Are paranormal experiences actually spiritual experiences? What does your religion actually say about ghosts?
Well, hello there, and welcome to the 234th broadcast of Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno. I'm Ben, and those questions came from my co-host and partner in the paranormal, my dad. But everybody else knows the drill, so before we welcome our guest, let's do our weekly paranormal contest. So last week's question was, when and where was the only officially reported Bigfoot sighting in Providence County, Rhode Island?
Kelly Perez of Millbury, Massachusetts was the first to get the correct answer to that one. The only officially recorded Bigfoot sighting in Providence County, Rhode Island was in October 1998 in the Black Hut Management Area in Burrillville, Rhode Island. A lone biker reported a 6-foot gray ape-like figure at the end of Spring Lake Road. Now, both you and your brother grew up swimming in the lake there at Spring Lake.
I remember Spring
We never
Lake.
saw any big feet, though. Anyway, the official report was to the Bigfoot Field Researchers Organization, the BFRO, so I consider that official.
Okay, well, we saw a lot of little feet. If that's...
Yeah, a lot of ducks and things.
Yeah, that was a terrible joke. But anyway, this week's question is a bit of a lighthearted question. So, in what 1981 movie are the ghost hunters ghosts themselves? So, if we could be any more vague, and if you get that right, get it right and win a copy of Holy Ghosts, or How a Not-So-Good Catholic Boy Became a Believer in Things That Go Bump in the Night by tonight's guest. So call us locally at 401-766-1240 or nationally at 800-449-1240. If nobody gets an answer before the end of the show and you still think you have a shot, drop a line to me at ben@behindtheparanormal.com.
Gary Jansen has worked in publishing in the New York City area for more than 15 years and served as editor-in-chief of the Quality Paperback Book Club. I subscribed to that for many years. He is currently an editor at the Crown Publishing Group, specializing in books on religion and spirituality. His first book, The Rosary, A Journey to the Beloved, I love that title, was praised by Paul Coelho, the best-selling author of The Alchemist, as a wonderful book, not just wonderful, but very important, unquote. Publishers Weekly's review of Jansen's second book, Exercising Your Soul, 15 Minutes a Day to a Spiritual Life, called him an author who, quote, amuses and inspires, unquote. Tonight we're talking about Gary's latest title, Holy Ghosts, or How a Not-So-Good Catholic Boy Became a Believer in Things That Go Bump in the Night.
It's a really long title, but Gary Jansen, welcome to Behind the Paranormal.
Hey, thank you, Ben. Hi, Ben. Hi, Paul.
Hello.
Nice to see you, Gary. Well, or at least hear you, anyway.
It's nice to look at your voice.
Yes, okay. Before Ben starts with the questions, Gary, I'm going to just make a few points, all right, and then we'll get to those later on.
Sure.
This book affected me deeply because, in the beginning at least, you're telling my story. And I think I'm speaking for a lot of our listeners when I say that, because a lot of people go through what you went through as a boy and growing up and questioning all these things that happened to you. So, in a way, your story was my story. Now, I think, as I say, it'll resonate with many of our listeners. Now, as a professional journalist, as an editor for the past 30 years myself, I love good writing, and this is a very well-written book. That's an increasing rarity today. But it's the story of every man. In the medieval times, the everyman plays. It's something that can happen to anyone, and the questions you ask might be asked by anyone. Your paranormal questions, studying the teaching of the Roman Catholic Church on the subject, such as it is. And the difference with you and me, though, is that I was actually studying for the priesthood at the time when I was going through what you were going through. I was working later on with priestly scholars and exorcists, and I took it much farther in the position that I was in than you were able to. And I spent the next 40 years on it, eventually reaching the conclusion. Unlike yourself, however, here's where the difference comes in, that the entire paranormal belief structure, whether from the church, the psychics, the spiritualists, is all wrong. Not false, but wrong. So I'll leave it there for now. We'll get on with it. Ben?
Okay, so let's get this started. Let's get this started from the beginning, Gary. So tell us about your story.
Yeah, just say, without giving away everything in the book, if you could just tell us the story of what happened and what's in the book.
Sure. Back in March of 2008. I went into my son's room, and guys, there's like a lot of feedback or something, or I'm hearing my echo. Is there a way you could fix that?
Well, Mr. Producer, how are we doing?
We will try to come up with a solution.
We'll try to come up with a solution. Okay.
Okay.
And we're not getting it here, so.
All right. So essentially, back in March 2008, I went upstairs to my son's room to just get him a pair of socks, and it was a cold March night, and his room was dark. There was a nightlight on, and it was just something that I did many times. But this one particular night, I walk into my son's room and I feel something I've never felt the intensity of before. And I thought there was someone standing in my son's room. And since my wife was downstairs and my son was down there with him, my son was 3 years old at the time, I knew that there was no one else in the house except for myself. But I felt something. And so I quickly turned around, almost positive that there was going to be somebody there. It felt so strong. And then saw nothing. And the room was dark again. And I thought, well, my mind's just playing tricks on me. Went to go get the socks, and as I turned to leave the room, I feel something unlike I had ever felt before. And the only way I can describe it, it's as if there was someone wearing an electric glove that was rubbing the length of my back. All of a sudden, my whole back just went electric. And I was paralyzed for like 10 seconds, maybe 20 seconds, 30 seconds. Not paralyzed physically, but just emotionally, psychological. It's like, what the heck was that? And then it disappeared. And kind of being a member of the, ADHD generation, by the time I reached downstairs, I'd forgotten about it. And probably would have written it off and not thought about it again, except that it happened the next day, and the next day, and the next day, but only in my son's room. And I started noticing patterns over time, and then more odd things began happening into the house, the classic haunting stuff. And so I grew up, the way I grew up, I was, my mom was someone who believed in ghosts. My dad was a rationalist who didn't believe in ghosts. And so I was kind of split in two different worlds. So my mom was a religious person, my dad wasn't. My dad was very practical, my mom was this dreamer. And so I had both of those parts in me. But I think I sided more with my dad, just being a rationalist. If I couldn't see it, I didn't really believe it, even though I was really drawn to religion. And over time, I went to Catholic school for so many years, and I was drawn back to my faith. But really drawn back to my faith as a Catholic, intellectually, because I really liked to read theology, I liked to read about it. But, spiritually speaking, I was very, I was really a novice, even before a novice. I was very babyish sometimes, I guess, in my spirituality. But intellectually, I loved intellectual religious argument. I loved a lot of theology, and that's what really drew me back to the Catholic Church. So all of these things started to kind of mix, and then over the course of a single year, kind of just the way I was brought up, my mom believing in ghosts, my dad not, I was split because these weird, odd things started happening in the house, and so I'm split between belief and disbelief. And so that's really kind of just the summation of the story.
So this is the same house you grew up in, though, right?
Yes. So
yeah, okay.
The house I grew up in, and what happened was when I was about six, my parents bought this house, and it always had kind of a creepy feeling in it. And so a lot of things happened when we were growing up. Again, classic haunting things, tappings and rappings, and things that probably could have been, at least the way my dad saw it. My dad thought, well, now that's the mouse, or the rat, or the house settling. Even though the house was 70 years old at the time, you would think the house would have settled already. But there were a lot of noises and a lot of things that happened, and a lot of odd-sounding footsteps and whispers that were coming from nowhere. But my mom always believed it was a ghost. My dad always wrote it off as, nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I was about, in my 30s, as luck would have it, I ended up buying the house from my mom, who wanted to move away. So my wife and I were married for a few years, and we decided, let's buy my mom's house. I'll move back to where my ancestral home, and begin raising a family.
Okay. And was it your son, was it Eddie?
Yes.
Who began to have similar experiences? In his room, as you say, yeah.
Right. So Eddie, right around that time, so everything began in March for me, and then a few months later, my son refused to go into his room, and it seemed that all this stuff was just happening. Like I would have these sensations where I'd walk into my son's room, and if I was there by myself, I would feel something. If I was there with my wife, I wouldn't. If I was there with my son, I wouldn't. And if it was the three of us together, I wouldn't feel anything. It was only when I was dropping something off in his room, clothes, or picking up a book, that's when I felt it, and it happened all the time. And then after a few months, and again, while this is all going on, it was odd, but I didn't think it was really anything paranormal or supernatural. But then after a few months, my son refused to go in his room. He just did not want any part of it. And when he experienced, or when he said he just refused to go into that room, I talked to my wife, and, while all this was going on, my wife had just miscarried, so I wasn't going to bring up these odd things that were happening to me. I thought maybe it was just stress or whatever. And eventually I just talked to her about it, and she said she was experiencing things as well. So strange shadows, she was seeing things move that weren't there. And, so all of this kind of came together. And at that point I thought, well, maybe there's something really, something beyond this world going on, which kind of, shook me up a bit.
Mm-hmm.
But being a book person and being someone who does a lot of research, I wanted to start researching. Well, what did the Catholic Church have to say about this? And, what did religion have to say about it? Because to be honest with you, I didn't know. Having gone to Catholic school for 12 years, they never, ever once talked about ghosts. They hardly ever talked about angels. They hardly ever talked about the spirit. They would talk about ideas. They would talk about, right action, what you should do.
Mm-hmm.
But they never really talked about spiritual matters. And that was
of this kind,
a lot of us just have to explore on our own. So.
Okay. All right. Well, now, Ben's got the next question.
Yes. So, in the book, according to the psychic you consulted and your own belief, the two ghosts in this house on Long Island were not evil. Well, Long Island's had a pretty crazy history as of late. So, why do you think that you were so afraid of them as a child, and why your own son after you?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I think, I think for me, I was afraid of, like most people, just of the unknown. You have these things that are happening to you that, I always thought were really, objects of fairy tales or just, stories that you would hear, on TV or on movies or in books. Not that it was, of this world. So I think for me, it was something that just was so odd. And in retrospect, I think I let my imagination, kind of like take me in certain like dark arenas for a little while, because then I was thinking, well, if there's something in the house, it's dark, it's evil. So I think that in that part, my imagination kind of probably freaked me out a little bit more. So we had these incidents that were happening, but then whether it be things I just heard about growing up or even things from my own theology, I think I started to color those experiences.
Yeah, that's an ever-present danger with the imagination.
Exactly. And, and I think for my son, too, I think it was something that, even though there was one ghost in there that wasn't evil, he was, as Mary Ann, the psychic, said, was a troublemaker, or was someone who liked to cause trouble. And, and there's something that I bring up because of the whole idea of curses. One of the ghosts may have been in there for a long time. Another one was only in there starting in March. It arrived in March, right around the time I started feeling everything, and right around the time my wife had a miscarriage.
Yeah, that's the famous March 7th date that you mentioned?
Right.
Yeah,
right.
okay.
So the March 7th date. So this man, after doing some investigating, I found out that this male spirit that was in the house died on the same day my wife miscarried. So that opened up a whole, was that just a coincidence, or is there something else going on that has something to do with souls? How does souls communicate? I mean, does one soul try to help another soul into the next life? What is the power of words? Without giving the story away, was there something that I did that actually had the spirit attached to me for some reason?
Yeah.
And
all common questions.
Right, and and this really brought up the whole power of words, and which is kind of which I just didn't get it at the time, but in retrospect, I mean, even in the Bible it says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and, so you have this power of word, and word kind of creating things, can we create our own reality by the words that we use? And can we influence the reality of others? Can we say things and actually have spirits attach themselves to us? Can we cause curses without even knowing? So all of a sudden, these really big kind of metaphysical questions just started popping up and resonating while all this was going on.
Yeah, again, go ahead, Ben.
Okay. So did any of this make you question your Catholic faith at any point?
It made me, the biggest question was, what does the Catholic faith have to say about it? And then I learned that it has very little to say. Especially, in the catechism of the Catholic Church, there isn't a word about ghosts. They do talk about spirits and angels, and exorcism and evil, but nothing about ghosts. So what was a ghost? The Catholic Church didn't believe in ghosts. So it took a lot of looking at secondary sources and some church theologians. And even there wasn't a lot of information.
No, there isn't. Yeah.
Now, there's Herbert Thurston, who wrote a book called, Ghosts and Poltergeist.
That was the first book I read at the age of 17.
Right.
Yeah.
And that was the book that, that really said the most about them.
Yeah,
and that was
a
really
Jesuit priest from England.
Right.
Yeah.
And those are mostly case studies, too.
Then he wasn't there.
Right, exactly. Yeah. He was just recording these.
Yeah.
There was another book that came out in the 50s by another Jesuit called Occult Phenomena, which investigated, which talked about ghosts, but really looked at the whole idea of spirits and the occult and, clairvoyance and telepathy and all those things. Okay. And then essentially, you don't hear anything until, the one thing that I found in John Harden's, modern dictionary of the Catholic Church was definition for ghosts, that ghosts do exist in Catholic theology or Catholic belief. They're just not talked about. So why aren't they talked about? So that again brought up more questions.
I have my whole story on that, but
right.
You're being interviewed, so
yes. So from all this research that you've done, what surprised you most about what you found?
Well, the thing is that in some ways I've become a paranormal convert, and you always have to watch out for converts because they get really evangelical on you about stuff. But how how deep the history is and how deep the investigating is. Paul, I was reading your book over the weekend, and you said that you're never going to be able to come up with evidence that's good enough for the skeptic, no matter what. You can't. But when you start looking back at the history of all, the history of supernatural occurrences, the history of paranormal experiences, those first-hand accounts, they go back for thousands of years, and they many come from very credible sources, and so you have all this first-hand information there of people having experiences, and that's what fascinated me the most, and that's for me.
Yeah, me too. When I was in the same position,
yeah, and just kind of set me off. And sure, some of these people could have misinterpreted, but when you start looking at the wealth of history and the wealth of experience that has gone on, and the parallels between cultures, and even looking at the saints and their experiences, and that was another question that came up, which is, if someone has clairvoyance or sees an apparition, unless they're a saint, most of the time people see it as a demonic thing.
That's a whole other question we're going to get into later. Yeah.
Yeah, and that kind of drove me crazy, and I think a big part of after having gone through everything, I wanted to write a book that kind of addressed that. And even though I don't address that directly in the book, that's the reason why I wanted to write the book. I met a lot of people that had experiences who were people of faith, or people who weren't even people of faith.
No, that's true.
They had all these, questions, and they felt ostracized, or they felt, like they were freaked, and it just did, and that kind of, that paradox that if a common person has, an experience like this, well, obviously, we should be skeptical because, skepticism is healthy if it's done in a healthy way. You don't want to take everyone's, word for everything.
Mm-hmm.
So it's good to have a healthy skepticism.
Very true.
But,
okay, Ben's got another question.
But so many times skepticism just turns into cynicism, and that's kind of,
that's well put. Yes, or skepticemia, as I call it.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Go ahead, Ben.
Okay, so what did your friends and family think of all this?
Yeah, when I finally came out and told my mom about everything, she was like, well, it's about time. I told you that like 30 years ago. So, my mom felt, and partially I think it was another reason for writing the book was to vindicate my mom, who for years had said all these things. And my sisters I think it brought up a lot of memories because I have 4 sisters, and each of them had different experiences growing up, which I didn't include in the book, really just because I wanted to just be my story, but brought up a lot of, their past memories, things that they had experienced. And I think friends overall, I work with a number of, really great, like, Catholic authors, and I think they were very, I think they were a bit, they were kind, is the best way I could say it.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't come out and support me, but they did condemn me. So overall, the response has been varied, mostly good.
Sure. Okay.
But,
go ahead, Ben.
Okay, so we find in our work we found that almost all paranormal phenomena always affects a wide geographic area. Did you ever find out if your neighbors were having similar problems to you?
No, we actually live. The way that we live, we actually don't have many neighbors. We have, one woman who lives next door to us, and not very close to her, so I'm not exactly sure what experience that she had. But there are other things, just kind of researching the history of Long Island to do the book to just see how prevalent, paranormal experience has been on, island. And I wonder if, this is the question really for you guys, if for some reason the island, for whatever reason, seem to have more activity than other places. I don't really know, but it was just I was overwhelmed actually by the amount of paranormal, history that I found just in the area. Not for my exact town that seemed to come up kind of non-existent, but just other areas, literally like the next town over, 2 towns over.
Okay. All right, we're going to take a short commercial break here, and we'll be right back with our guest, Gary Jansen, and we'll continue to talk about Holy Ghosts. And we'll start. I'm going to ask some questions of my own. Be right back. Stay with us.
Join the Rhode Island Wind Ensemble as it celebrates 5 years of performing at the St. Anne Arts and Cultural Center on May 1st at 2 p.m. That's Entertainment is the theme of this year's concert, with music from Broadway, film, and television, including such hits as The Phantom of the Opera, 5 by the Beatles, the theme from Superman and Silverado the movie, the Washington Post March by John Philip Sousa, and many more. Come and celebrate 5 years of performances of the Rhode Island Wind Ensemble at the St. Anne Arts and Cultural Center, May 1st at 2 o'clock. For tickets and information, call 401-356-0713 or visit StAnneArtsCTR.org. This concert is made possible through the generosity of Miss Lorena Myers.
You can depend on us for public service, ON Radio.
Okay, we're back behind the paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno on WOON 1240 AM and ONWorldwide.com here in New England's beautiful Blackstone River Valley. Our guest is Gary Jansen, author of the really, really good book, Holy Ghosts. And Gary, I'm going to start now giving you some of my own impressions and some of my own questions, because, as I say, our backgrounds from that point of view started out in a very similar way. Now, you eventually turned to your faith for explanations for the paranormal things you're experiencing, and you've told us about that. And what you say in the book is right. Roman Catholics, the teaching is very unclear on this. And as you say at one point in the book, it often depends on whom you're speaking to. The saints also had a lot of weird experiences, as you say in the book, and the actual Catholic belief really does depend on who you're talking to. You read a lot of books. At any point, did you actually seek the advice of a priest?
I did, but not until after the experience. So the book itself takes place over a year's time, and it's sort of told in real time. So I try not to, obviously it's impossible when you're writing a book like that to put in what I experienced afterwards while it was going on. I really wanted to try and tell the story as it was unfolding for me.
Yeah.
So I did it, but afterwards, and I think I was nervous, while it was all going on, only because I do know a lot of priests, but all of them and someone knew him very well. And I think all of them would have looked at me like I had two heads.
Well, you're absolutely right, because having spent 10 years in seminaries and having graduated from 2 of them, I have to tell you that you're right. They don't teach this in the seminary.
Right, and I was, and to be honest with you, I was really nervous that they were going to think I was crazy, or that I was, and I was actually nervous that they wouldn't take me seriously about things. And I liked to just have theological discourse with them about stuff. So a lot of people, have written into me and they're like, well, why didn't you call a priest after we didn't have a priest come in? And the thing is, I had the house blessed, and Mary Ann, who was the ghost whisperer, who kind of led me through all of trying to get rid of the ghost. She had said, well, priests can come in and they can bless the house. That doesn't necessarily mean they get rid of the ghosts that are in there. They can do a blessing, but a lot of times you can bless the ghost that's still in there. And I had a priest come in there and kind of do a blessing, just a basic house blessing. He didn't do that rite of exorcism, and I guess that minor rite of exorcism that you can do when you come in. He just did a simple blessing, but that was way before anything started happening. So for me, there was a lot of trepidation about actually reaching out to the church, just for fear of,
I also want to give I always forget this part. Give our call-in numbers today, because we do allow call-ins. It's locally 401-766-1240, 1240, or nationally 800-449-1240. Feel free to call in today to talk to us or Gary about this interesting subject. Now, I have to tell you, Gary, personally, I'm astounded at the intellectual jump you made from what I'll give you a chance to talk about how you found the ghost whisperer here, whom you used. But I'm kind of amazed at the jump you made from what you read about in church teaching, as I say, such as it is, to the decision to call a psychic. You say in the book that the church forbids the conjuring of spirits. Now, correct me if I'm not understanding you correctly. The church forbids the conjuring of spirits. Then you figure that by calling in the psychic, you aren't actually conjuring spirits. You're just communicating with ones that are there already.
Right.
Now, any priest would have told you that this was a really reckless rationalization. Now, what say you?
Oh, I guess they would probably be right. I wanted to tell the story the way it happened. And sometimes you do things without necessarily, knowing why you're doing things. And so for me, when I made that decision, even looking back, I'm like, well, wow, why did I make that leap? And I'm sure I could probably go to therapy and figure it out. But there was this point where I felt like, you know what, intellectually I've gone as far as I can, so why don't I try something like this? And plus there was this whole thing going on in my mind about the idea of discernment of spirit. So it was a bit reckless, but it was also, for me, it was intellectually and theologically challenging, because there is a gift of the Holy Spirit called discernment of spirit. And
well, there is, yeah.
You can look at that as, well, the gift is to know right from wrong. To know the difference between, the idea of good versus evil, when you're being led astray and when you're not. But it could also mean someone who actually discerns a good spirit from a bad spirit. So couldn't it be possible that a lot of, that someone like Mary Ann, who was able to talk to spirits, might have the gift of discernment, the discernment of spirits, yeah.
Well, in one way...
there was also kind of like, for me, theologically, I was looking into that and kind of questioning that as well.
Yeah. So. Well, in one way, it pointed out to me that it was really sort of an indictment, not only of the Roman Church, but of several others who don't provide a place to go for people when this happens. And they really feel at times they have no choice but to turn to psychics, mediums, ghosts, whatever you want to call them. And that bothers me. The trouble with what happened to me was that I was working in the wake of the Exorcist movie, released in '73, and that's when I was in the seminary. And they didn't want to talk about any of this. I got in all kinds of hot water. By '77, I was given the axe 2 years before ordination because I was involved in not the paranormal as such, but in paranormal research. They didn't want anything to do with it, and that was. I think a big mistake if they just come clean and said, this is what it is, here's what we believe about it, this is what you can do, just be honest and simple and clear. They would, instead of clamming up like they always do, I think it would have been better. But anyway, that's my story, not yours. Anyway, okay. How did you come upon Anne, the ghost whisperer? Why don't you tell us how you contacted her and what happened with that.
Yeah, sure. So I work in publishing. I've worked in publishing for a long time. So I was having lunch with an acquaintance and kind of told her about what was going on. And, she said, oh, we should reach out to this woman, Marianne Witkowski, who was the inspiration for the TV show The Ghost Whisperer.
Yeah, she's well known.
And so Marianne she's out in Cleveland, and I'm in New York. And when my friend told me about this, I was like, no, there's no way, I'm not going to do that. And it really took me about 6 months before, I made the call. And during that period, that's when I was doing a lot of research, and that's when I was thinking. I was writing a book about St. Ignatius. St. Ignatius, talked all the time about this.
Oh, he had all kinds of experiences.
Right. So he had all these crazy experiences, and he really talked a lot about the idea of spirit. So I read her book and all that, and eventually there was a bit of a leap of faith to call her and say, hey, you know what? Things are kind of exacerbating in the house. My wife had just had a baby. After having miscarried, we had gotten pregnant again, and she had a baby. And I wanted to make sure that the house was safe, to be honest with you, because things were still happening. It was still giving me the creeps. It was giving my son the creeps. It was giving my wife the creeps. And so I made that call, and what was fascinating was how accurate, because, and part of me, I did it as a lark, part of me did it as I wanted to, investigate this idea of disturbing spirits, and the other part of me was just plain curious about, whether or not she picked up on anything. And she was amazingly accurate, just about the layout of the house, my past history, and she didn't know anything about me. And there was nothing up on the internet at that time where you could have learned anything about me. And so she starts telling me all these things about stuff that's going on in the house. And when she brought up that there were two spirits in the house, one that had a that mirrored what my mother had told me when I was 6 or 7 or 8 growing up, and she said there was a very particular spirit in the house. Marianne told me about that same particular spirit. And then she told me that there's another one in the house. He's a bit of a troublemaker, but he's only been in the house for a year. And I had made that call almost a year to the date from that first incident. So she was able to pick up that something had entered the house and had only been there for a year. And then, a big part of, that next month and a big part of the book is investigating who those people were. Why were they in the house?
Okay. Real quick question, Steve. This kind of goes away from... Gary, sorry.
It's all right, it's Monday.
It's Monday. Okay, so Gary, real quick question. This kind of goes away from the phenomena a little bit and just goes to a little bit of your personal beliefs. What is your definition of a spirit?
Great question. The spirit really for me is, I believe that there's the non-material part of us, that, and then maybe it's not so non-material because the more and more I'm thinking about this, and, Paul, I think I might have read this in your book over the weekend, but it's something I've been toying with for, I don't know.
Yeah, which book of mine did you read?
Oh, it's the one with God in the title, the one that came out in 2000.
Oh, God, Ghosts, and Human Destiny. Okay,
yeah.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
And but about that maybe the human soul is a type of plasma or something. So for me, the spirit is you're not the non-material part of us. Maybe it's if you want to call it the soul, you call it the soul. And for me, it's about the spirit. Really, is about almost pure experience. We can have a physical experience, an emotional experience, a psychological experience, but the soul seems to be something that brings all of those things together and seems to be non-material. So that's what the definition of.
All right, well, this is where we part company. Do you have anything else?
You can keep going with your...
Okay.
Whatever it is you're going to do.
Well, as you know, if you've read anything I've written, Gary, in my opinion, there isn't, or our opinion, I should say, there isn't a single event in your book that can't be explained in terms of the multiverse, this concept all our listeners are familiar with. That's the basis of all our paranormal and spiritual work, as you know. And in the course of your entire experience, did you ever question the almost universal assumption that this is all about some kind of spirit world and people not crossing over and all this business? See, our problem is, without your body, are you still you? We say no.
Right.
That's not possible. So did you ever question all these spiritualist assumptions that just everybody just assumes are true?
Yeah, no, I think I did, and I'm continuing, and just since all this has happened in the book itself, I think all of us, and I think a big part of anybody who does research in any kind of field, is to question the norm. It's the question, not to do it in a in a disrespectful way, but in the most respectful way that you possibly can. It's the question, certain ways of thinking.
Yeah.
And, and there's a lot of talk about interdimensional beings, and, ghosts are interdimensional, and, and there's a lot of other things, like you were just saying that, can you be the same person without your body? And you probably can, but there's so many different theories there, and that's what, for me, this is such a brand new world. I've been kind of in this world for about 3 years right now, and and every day I realize that I know less and less and less.
Yeah, it's true.
And,
well, that's a true measure of intelligence.
And it just, for me, the whole idea of, so there's a lot of talk about interdimensional and multidimensional beings, and I think religion has been talking about that from the get-go.
Yeah, I think so too. In a way, yeah. Certainly.
There is an earth, and there is a heaven, and Catholics believe, in a purgatory, and a lot of people don't believe in a purgatory, but Buddhists have similar beliefs, Hindus, and the Vedic traditions, have all these different realms of possibilities. And what are realms really but different dimensions? So the idea of interdimensional, multidimensional is just
well, I don't want to leave the issue of the psychic either, or the medium. Now there are two opinions on that in this room, perhaps. One is that you don't know where these people are getting their information, and many would say that they're possibly receiving it from entities who are not nice. Okay.
Right.
I might say, I'm not impressed by the accuracy of any of these people. Not to demean them. I know many psychics and mediums who are the salt of the earth. They really believe they're doing the right thing. And several of them really have a real grasp of what I would call the same theories we work on, and they approach it that way. But I'm not really impressed by accuracy. Anybody can do that.
Yeah.
Really, and it's just a matter of being in the right frame of mind, and you don't even, it's a human thing to do. It's a survival instinct that we developed as and that's my opinion. So that in itself doesn't really impress me, with all due respect to Ann, whom I do not know and who's never been on the show. But the idea, the son seen running into the washroom in that one incident, when he was really in the other room with the team, man, that's classic that's happened. You used to do that.
Yeah.
Or whatever. So, I mean, these are all very familiar. The glass shattering in the middle of the room at one point. You couldn't see it. See, I read your book very carefully. And I do love it. But these are all questions that just arose in my mind. It just seems that one thing that you really do hit on the head that I really loved was you're realizing the spirituality of what, in my book, I refer to as the unity. You really seem to kind of grasp that as an ultimate lesson of all this, and I thought that was really great.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it was really, I think in so many ways, like when coincidence happens, for me, coincidence is or what we call coincidence, because I don't really believe that there's a coincidence. I believe that there's something beyond that we don't really understand. As you were saying, I think you're saying in your book as well, that all these experiences that we call supernatural, very natural experiences. We might not understand them, we might not know, but they are they're natural.
Mm-hmm.
And so the idea of everything, and that's what Ignatius, and that's why there's a lot of subtlety in the book. It's about, the idea of, like, Ignatius is in there, and his whole idea is to seek God everywhere, and because God is in all things, God is everywhere. So how come we haven't talked more, or how come there are these great ghost hunting shows on TV, but there's few on there that go into the spiritual element of it. That maybe these things are spiritual messages. That, when we have these experiences or when we pick up on things, what we're really doing is the time for us to engage spiritually and to seek and to search ourselves spiritually and to seek God and to seek understanding. So that spiritual element really became, the underlying.
Yeah, well, that's good. Yeah, Ben's got another.
Yeah, I see where you're coming from on that, because they do all this stuff and they run around with their cameras and their EVPs and all these wonderful gadgets, but they seem to miss the whole human part of this, which you're talking about, the human and spiritual part of this, and they completely miss the point. So I'm glad that you can grasp that.
Yeah, and I think, and obviously these shows are on TV, and they're, they want to be dramatic, and they only have, a half hour or 40 minutes to kind of tell their story. So, these are things that it's kind of the USA Today mentality. Like USA Today is a great newspaper, but it's a lot of charts and stuff. You can like read something and get like an idea in like 10, 20 seconds.
Mm-hmm.
But if you really want to, and that's why they don't really talk about spiritual issues. So obviously there's separation of church and state. You want to kind of keep these away. Journalists are kind of afraid to talk about these things. But when it comes to spiritual or philosophical ideas, and what we're really talking about is really a philosophical idea. These things take a long time to talk about, and they take, and so these shows just don't, a lot of times just don't have the time.
Yeah.
I think to go in.
One thing I find very interesting in our own case is that after having, and I must say it was the Orthodox who threw me out of the seminary, not the Roman. I graduated from 2 Roman Catholic seminaries, then I went to an Orthodox one, and they're the ones who had enough of me because of this. But the faculty at Wadham's Hall, the second seminary I graduated from, was actually rather sympathetic to this, and that was when the whole Bridgeport thing of 1974 that had occurred while I was a student there, and that I thought they were rather good. But it's ironic that today, with this show and elsewhere, I've got priests, Roman Catholic and Orthodox, all over us with interest in this subject. Have you noticed any kind of lightening up from those early days when it comes to these things among the clergy or among the people you deal with in the church?
Yeah, a little bit. The thing is, after all these experiences, I ended up running into people who actually knew about these things. So they are out there. I think, the church is not going through a progressive time. I don't think religion is going through a progressive time because I think in many ways religion in all forms is under attack, and it's under criticism.
Organized religion, yeah.
Sure, organized religion.
Yeah.
So when you're under attack, you're not out there, exploring new ideas. What you do is you kind of hunker down because, they're hurling arrows at you.
Yeah.
You're not out exploring as much. So I think right now we're going through a very conservative time, in
That's true.
We're in the 60s and 70s, you had a little bit more, well, let's take a look, let's explore a little bit, and then sometimes that turned into abuses throughout all religion, organized religion.
Mm.
And so I feel like right now, maybe not so much. There are definitely people out there. The problem is that, the church has to deal, or any organized religion has to deal with so many different things. People getting married, people dying, people having, psychological problems, losing their jobs. So when it comes to things like this, which in many ways they're so important, but they kind of get left out in the cold.
Yeah.
Just really, I think, again, it comes back to that TV show mentality. You only have 40 minutes, and if to tell your story. Or if you're a church with only 2 priests who have to administer to 5,000 people,
yeah.
where do you get the time to actually sit down and do this? So, as much as I think the church could do more, to talk about these things, and to not hide, just come out and explore and have a conversation. Don't be so judgmental about it.
Exactly, yeah.
At the same time, I feel like, wow, these guys don't really have time to have dinner or to eat lunch, that there are other things that they're dealing with. And so I guess if there were more people in the churches doing things, maybe we could have a little bit more dialogue. But right now, I just don't see that happening anytime.
Well, it was intriguing for me to find out here in the Blackstone Valley there is an Orthodox church, and they usually have 100, 150 families tops, so they're lucky that way, pastorally speaking. But there's a church locally that's had a seminar on the paranormal. A lot of people came, and who else turned up? But one of the fellows who used to work with Ed and Lorraine Warren, who were very prominent, sort of grandfather and grandmother of modern ghost hunting. I worked with them in the early 70s. And he had become an Orthodox priest, and he was now lecturing on this subject at this seminar. So they've at least come a long way, even if the Romans haven't. But the Romans have come a long way too. There's one really last question that I had for you here, Gary. And we always ask everyone this because we find that things are connected, as you know. Have you ever had other paranormal experiences, such as UFOs, anything of that kind in your life that you can recall?
Yeah, not UFOs. Since the experience happened, I feel like I am sensitive to certain things that I've never been sensitive before. Now, I can't tell you if there's a man or a woman in a room or something like that. But there have been times where I experienced the same sensation. It doesn't happen often. But there was a time when I was at a seminary when I experienced that sensation. There's another time, a few people have asked me to come to their houses, just to see if there's anything there. And I'm like, and I just kind of do it to do it. Most of the time I don't feel anything. But the last time I went, I felt that experience, that I had felt. So so nothing more than that. And in the experiences I had when I was growing up, the one thing that made me, actually after kind of, doing some of the research, actually after the book was written, I was very fortunate enough to get Whitley Strieber to read the book, and he gave me a really nice endorsement. And it made me go back and read Communion.
Yeah.
And then that's like all of a sudden, and that led me to Jacques Vallée, and then you start seeing, wow, people are having ghostly experiences, and it mirrors in many ways people who have had alien experiences. And then you start looking at this, and you start reading in folklore about how the fairy experience is just as similar as the ghost experience.
Yeah, that's right.
To the alien experience.
Yeah, we've done whole shows on that.
Yeah, and there was, and there's a part in the book where there was, when I was a kid, I used to suffer from sleep paralysis or old hag syndrome. And not that I would ever say that there was an alien, but having read Communion, in light of having read my book, there is an incident where Whitley describes something very similar to something I experienced as a child, which is this kind of being with, huge eyes, and all of a sudden, boom, it's on top of you, and you're struggling. So, I'm not saying that's an alien, but there was that experience, and so that's intrigued me so much. So now I'm kind of doing interdisciplinary, what you call comparative religion. I think we should, we should run courses on comparative paranormal experiences.
Very true. Very good. Yeah. Well, we always find the same thing. I mean, we apply certain terms to these phenomena. We got into this last night on CBS. We were talking about, aliens versus ghosts, and which is which. And there was someone who wrote in who said that she was an investigator in New York City on an amateur basis and had encountered a classic ghost situation. The guy claimed to be a relative of the family, and she started to apply our methods. And she didn't quite feel right about it, this entity, what it said it was, questioned it, and the thing immediately turned into something else, turned into what appeared to be an alien. So, I mean, this is really the kind of thing you run into. We don't trust these things, and that essentially is the message of the church, I think, too, was that don't trust, right from 1 John, don't believe every spirit,
Right. And I think, right, I think you make a very good point, and that's essentially why the church tells you, you don't know whether a spirit is good or bad because you just don't know. So stay away from it because essentially you never know, if Lucifer's going to come. He's not going to come as a bad guy. He's going to come as a good guy who tries to gain
wolf in sheep's clothing. Well, there is a lot of wisdom behind that. So. Well, we've dissected your book. It's only fair, since you've read one of mine, the one before that is really the real popular one, Footsteps in the Attic. But Turning Home is kind of controversial. People didn't expect it. So you want to take a few shots at me? Go ahead if there's anything in that book that you...
No, I was really I'd heard you, and I wish I actually had known about your books when I was doing my own research, but maybe in some ways it was a good thing I did. But I was listening to Coast, I think, last year, and I heard you on, and I went, oh my God, this guy had a similar experience. So I, sought out some of your books, and what I really liked about Footsteps was that you really took, you jumped on the idea of paranormal experience, spirituality, and bringing these things together. And for thousands of years, we had supernatural experiences, and then in the 20th century or late 19th, 20th century, we have paranormal experiences. Essentially the same thing, but it's our interpretation of things. And paranormal experience is really kind of a secular way of saying, supernatural. And in some ways, it takes the spirit out of these experiences. But I really liked your questioning. I liked hearing about your history, and I felt like, wow, we're simpatico because you were a seminarian in experience, having those amazing experiences in the woods. The book opens up with I'm going to screw up the name,
Bara Hack, as the historian told us it was called in Welsh.
Yeah, so I thought I had a fascinating time reading it.
Well, very good. Well, thank you. Okay, well, let's. What else are you working on? What's your next project?
Well, I was working on something. Whether or not it turns into a book project, that I'm not sure if it has the legs, but something called Naming the Demon. And Naming the Demon is, one of the first things in exorcism that you do is you try to get a demon to name itself, because when you get that demon to name itself, you're going to have control over it. And again, it comes back to the power of words. And kind of the similarities between, self-help and exorcism and other, spiritual exercises that happen. The first step in the 12-step program is, basically have to name yourself and name your disease. So I am Gary and I'm an alcoholic. What are you doing? You're naming the demon that's inside you.
Yeah, it's very true.
And exorcism, the same thing. You're trying to name the demon so that you can have control over it. And we put names on things. Why? Essentially to control them. Think about how someone has the upper hand if you don't know their name, and they know yours. So this whole idea of naming things, the power of names, is something that's fascinating to me. And
You're absolutely right.
Power of words, so.
The power of words in general.
Yeah.
There is no less true statement than sticks and stones will break my bones, but names will never hurt me. That is such baloney. Words are like bombs.
Exactly.
They have tremendous power. Look at the F word. People use it. It is so full of hate and destructiveness because of what it carries with. It's just I cringe when I hear people using words in a frivolous manner. Any words, and maybe it's my years as an editor, because after they tossed me the heck out of the seminary, I ended up in journalism. But anyway, we're pretty much out of time here. But Gary, it's been a fascinating conversation. You're a delightful guest, and the book is wonderful. And again, we just tell people where you can get it.
Sure. So it's called Holy Ghost, or How a Not So Good Catholic Boy Became a Believer in Things That Go Bump in the Night, and it's at Amazon and Barnes & Noble. And you can check out my website at GaryJansen.com. I'm on Twitter and Facebook, so look me up.
Well done. Okay, well, thank you, sir. We will be in touch off the air, and we'll hope to talk to you again soon.
Okay, thanks, Paul.
Have a good one.
Have a good one. Bye-bye now.
Okay, bye. Okay, I think we have time for...
We have about 4.5 minutes, 4 minutes.
Okay, maybe one email. Oh, yeah, there's an announcement here. This is from, and we're going to do this on CBS next Sunday as well, because I'll make sure everybody hears it. But this is David Marsh. David is from Portage, Indiana, and David is one of our show reporters.
One quick question.
Yeah.
You know the useful name thing, is that always set to no?
Yes.
Why didn't you explain that?
Oh, I'm sorry. You're always chiding me. Oh, no, people can set it to yes. But they usually don't. Anyway, David is a well-known show reporter. He's not going to object to our using his name. Okay, it's okay, Ben. I'll give you some ice cream later. All right. Okay, well, anyway, this is from our show last night. We had an email that I mentioned to Gary in our interview, and this had to do with a case in apparently the New York City area where a ghost was denied, the investigator denied that it believed what the ghost was saying, if it was a ghost. And,
okay.
Anyway, go ahead, Ben.
So in response to the last email, I would like to extend an invitation to the audience to email me with ghost stories for my research. As we discussed, I am working on investigating parasites using fears of aliens or aliens using fears of ghosts. Okay, so we should probably just give his email here. So David at behindtheparanormal.com.
Yeah, that's it. So, yeah, all our reporters have just their first names and at behindtheparanormal.com. So it's David at behindtheparanormal.com. And if you could copy us on those, we'd be interested in those too. Paul at behindtheparanormal.com or Ben at behindtheparanormal.com. This has been coming up a lot lately because we always question what these things really are. And when you do that, you just don't assume that the thing is what it says it is, or if, you don't trust it and you test it. And you often come up with some pretty remarkable results when you do that. And one of them is that these things seem to, at times, turn into what we would describe generally as aliens or vice versa. So this is what we're talking about. So let David know if you have any cases like that. And us, too. That would be very interesting to find out what's going on out there as far as that's concerned. Here, I think we better...
Yeah, we have 2 minutes.
Yeah, all right. We're done. Okay. Well, again, many thanks to our guest, Gary Jansen. Very interesting conversation. And let's see, we want to thank our marvelous producer, Steve Bianchi, and we'll see you next Monday, April 25th at 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 Pacific, right here on WOON, 1240 a.m. and onworldwide.com. We're in New England's beautiful Blackstone Valley, and check us out, especially if you're stuck in traffic in Boston or Providence and you want to have an interesting evening of it. Ben and I will take the hour next week to discuss a subject that might follow well from tonight's show, the subject, what is heaven?
Okay, so in the meantime, tune into our Sunday evening CBS radio edition in Boston, Pittsburgh, Detroit, and Seattle, and online at www.newskyradio.com. On April 24th, my dad and I will have an open line show to deal with our ever-growing pile of emails.
Mm-hmm.
It just never seems to go away. So, and remember, you can always get free podcasts of all shows, along with show schedules and guest information at www.behindtheparanormal.com.
Well, we don't want the emails to go away. We have a lot of very thinking and intelligent listeners, and we are very gratified.
Return to this radio frequency 167 hours from now for another edition of Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno.